Chapter 1297. The merry-go-round was indeed an attractive ride. Once the children got on, they were unwilling to get off. If Yang Yi hadn't told them that there would be a light show later, the children would probably have stayed until the next morning. All right, let's go watch the fireworks. She carefully got off the red-nosed reindeer with her father's help. She had been shouting for the whole day. Even though her parents often reminded her to drink water, the little girl's voice was still a little hoarse. However, why would a child care about her own voice? After the little girl got off the merry-go-round, she couldn't help but shout excitedly to Lan Xan, Yu Xiaowei, and the rest of her friends, who were still dawdling, "Xer, Sister Xiaowei, let's hurry up. We want to sit in the best seats to watch the fireworks." Hearing the little girl's hoarse voice, Yang Yi said with a little heartache, all right. Don't worry. No one will fight with us today. Don't worry about not having a good seat." Murphy was infected by the lively atmosphere of the children. She was smiling the whole day and was in a good mood. However, when she held Tong Tong's hand and was about to leave the merry-go-round with Yang Yi, she couldn't help but stop in her tracks. Sigh. Murphy looked at the gigantic merry-go-round that was even more colorful in the night sky. She sighed softly and felt a sense of regret in her heart. However, at this moment, Shi's giggles could be heard. The little girl saw that her mom didn't follow them, so she waved enthusiastically and shouted with difficulty, "Mom, we're here." Wow, the little girl was worried that her mother would fall behind and lose her way. She had to tell stories to her friends and take care of her unreliable mother. It was very tiring for her. Murphy heard her daughter's hoarse voice and came back to her senses. She smiled and held Tong Tong's hand as they walked up. She said to Shi, "Sister, you can't talk anymore. How much did you talk today? Look at how hoarse her throat is. Little brother, you should also tell elder sister to stop talking." Little Momo was sitting on the merry-go-round just now, spinning, and he was a little sleepy. What's more, he didn't have much rest today. With his perseverance and interest, he played with his sisters, so his body was actually very tired. Therefore, when Mo Fei talked to him, the sleepy little Momo was stunned for a while before he raised his head and looked at his mother in confusion. Perhaps because they were really tired, the 9 kids came to the best place to watch the fireworks with their parents. After sitting down on the comfortable benches, they all became quiet. Although they were still whispering, compared to when they had just come down from the castle in the afternoon, they all seemed to have turned from mantis shrimps into obedient babies. However, even though they were tired from playing, Chan Guochang said to Chen Shiyun, "We're going back to the hotel to rest after watching the fireworks." Mom can't even walk. Chen Shiyun was unwilling. She jumped out from between her parents and ran to Shi's side for a while and said, "Then you guys go back first. I'll continue playing with Shi. Hee. Shi bit on the straw of the milk and giggled. At this moment, a clear and sharp whistle suddenly came from the sky. "Baiyu!" Yang Yi hurriedly called everyone to look up. "Look, it's starting." They saw a fireball cut across the sky. When it reached the highest point of the snow castle, it suddenly exploded. It was as if thousands of pear trees had bloomed. The blooming fireworks immediately lit up the entire sky. Wow! Not only were the children amazed, but the adults were also amazed. However, this was only the beginning. As if the curtains had been pulled open, more fireworks flew into the sky and exploded. For a moment, the dark night sky seemed to be illuminated by a curtain of light. Moreover, it was constantly changing. One moment, it was a warm and beautiful orange. The next moment, it was a noble and elegant purple. There were also green, orange, and other colors that bloomed from various angles and in various forms. Not only were Cici, her friends, and her parents in the park able to enjoy this beautiful scenery, but the tourists who chose to stay in the nearby hotels at a high price or shop in the nearby newly opened commercial streets and snack streets also raised their heads in surprise and joy, seeing the iron trees and silver flowers reflected in the distant sky. "There's such a thing?" a tourist muttered to herself. She patted her trouser pocket happily. There were tickets for tomorrow's visit. There should be tickets for tomorrow too. Looks like I'll have to refund the tickets. I'm going to play until night time. I'm waiting to see the fireworks up close. Beside her, many people took out their phones and cameras to take pictures of the sky. Some were reporters, and some were ordinary people. However, it didn't matter. Ordinary people also wanted to show off in advance on their WeChat moments. Look, I'm going to play tomorrow. It looks like there are many surprises. However, in reality, what they saw from afar was far less shocking than what Yang Yi and the children saw up close. Moreover, other than the fireworks, they could also see a light show that couldn't be seen outside the park. There were countless controllable light bulbs on the exterior of the snow castle. Following the rhythm of the fireworks, the snow castle also constantly changed its color. At its most beautiful, the whole castle seemed to be enveloped in purple and white. It was as if the castle was made of inlaid amethysts and diamonds. Wow! It's so beautiful! Shi's eyes were in a daze. She clasped her hands in front of her and subconsciously exclaimed in admiration. It was as if she could become a princess like Sister Elsa and then live in such a beautiful castle. The little girl looked at the unprecedented scene. Her active thoughts started to spin again. Her imagination ran wild, and her heart was filled with happiness and joy. However, no matter how beautiful the show was, it had to come to an end. Seeing that the fireworks show had passed its most gorgeous peak and gradually began to weaken and come to an end, everyone felt a little unsatisfied. She couldn't help but raise her head. Her big bright eyes looked at her father expectantly. Papa, let's come and play in the future, okay? Okay, as long as you want to come, Papa will accompany you to play. Yang Yi smiled and said, we can come here infinitely, and then there will be more fun in the future. Like the island opposite, when we finish developing it, we can take a boat or a cable car to go there. There will be more exciting things that you can't imagine. I want to come too. Papa Yang, I want to come and play with Shi, okay? Lan Xian actually heard the conversation between Shi and Yang Yi from the noise of the fireworks. She ran over and squeezed into Yang Yi's arms. She looked at Shi and giggled. Of course, how can we leave our cutest Xian heir behind? Yang Yi smiled and pinched Lan Xian's little face. Shi happily snuggled in her father's arms. She counted her little hands and happily said, next time, I will bring Bao Bao, Xiao Guai, Du, and Xiao Hui to play together. Then Mom, brother, Xian heir, Lu Weisha, Sister Xiaowei, Chen Shiyun, and Grandpa and Grandma, little aunt. The little girl counted her relatives and friends. Suddenly, she thought of something and hurriedly added in her slightly hoarse voice, there's more. Uncle Gua, Sister Ding Xiang, and their baby. When the baby grows up, we will bring the baby to play together. As Yang Yi listened, he rubbed Cici's little head even more lovingly. That's a must. We have to call everyone. Everyone will be happy together. He. She happily acted coquettishly in her father's arms. She even contentedly twisted her little butt on the bench. The book is over. Of course not. Being mischievous makes me very happy. Author. When they returned to the hotel at night, Tong Tong was so sleepy that he fell asleep in his father's arms. She was the same. After taking a shower, she tiredly lay on the bed and played the role of a chicken pecking rice. After dozing off for a while, she also fell asleep before her mother could wipe Tong Tong's body. I'm also sleepy. I'm so tired today. Murphy covered the two little guys who were sleeping soundly with their blankets. She lay on the bed pitifully and looked at Yang Yi. She was so tired. She needed her husband to comfort her. However, Yang Yi mysteriously smiled. You can't rest yet. I still have a surprise for you. Quick, get up and change into your clothes. We'll be back soon. Ah. We still have to go out? Murphy pouted and rolled on the bed unwillingly. She was still unwilling to get up. In the end, she still wanted Yang Yi to hug and kiss her before she lazily got up. Where are we going? Murphy asked curiously as she sat in Yang Yi's car. However, Yang Yi did not say. He kept smiling mysteriously. This made Murphy feel as if there were 100 claws scratching her heart. She was so angry that her teeth itched. However, the buildings in front of them were becoming more and more familiar. Even Murphy, who had no sense of direction, recognized them. She asked in surprise, "Isn't this the way to the amusement park?" Of course, they were going to the amusement park. Yang-yi had already arranged everything. When his car arrived, the staff opened the door for him. Yang-yi drove the car directly to the merry-go-round attraction. The lights in the Snow Castle were already off. The other attractions were also off. The entire amusement park was dark. They were only waiting for tomorrow's trial opening. However, the merry-go-round was like a scene in a movie. It was the only place with lights on in the dark. However, it was bright and dazzling like the Milky Way. Now, how could Murphy not understand what Yang-yi wanted to do? She looked at Yang-yi, who had just stopped the car, with a face full of surprise. Her soft heart was filled with happiness and joy at this moment. Yang-yi walked over and opened the car door on Murphy's side. He struck a very gentlemanly pose and said with a smile, "My queen, please get out of the car. We are going to ride the merry-go-round." Wasn't there a saying? If she was inexperienced in the world, take her to see all the prosperity of the world. If her heart was full of vicissitudes, take her to ride the merry-go-round. Although Mo Fei's heart had not experienced the vicissitudes of life, and sometimes she was as silly as a child, Yang-yi still knew that in the past 6 months, Mo Fei still had a little burden in her heart. Yang-yi just wanted her to be as happy as a child and forget those unpleasant things. Sure enough, as Yang-yi expected, Murphy was reserved for a moment. She smiled and reached out her hand for Yang-yi to hold before getting out of the car. "Don't the staff need to rest? Aren't we disturbing them too much like this?" Murphy and Yang-yi walked hand in hand into the ticket gate of the merry-go-round amusement area and couldn't help but ask in a low voice, "It's okay. We've already agreed." Yang-yi comforted her. After entering the merry-go-round, Murphy's smile became brighter. Her white teeth and charming smiling eyes were full of joy and her love for Yang-yi. Yang-yi helped her onto the reindeer. Murphy couldn't wait for Yang-yi to sit on it and put one hand around her waist. This gave her a sense of security. "Tonight, I want to ride the merry-go-round with you like this." Murphy grabbed the pillow with both hands, leaned back, and snuggled into Yang-yi's arms. She said happily, "It's just that she and Chen made it impossible for us to leave. So now is the best time," Yang-yi said with a smile. He snapped his fingers at the staff outside. Finally, the merry-go-round began to turn. Murphy was just about to wave her hands and cheer happily like she and the other girls did tonight. However, the music in her ears suddenly made Murphy stunned. "There's a song? And it's not the 'Let It Go' that I'm tired of listening to tonight." Just as the merry-go-round was turning and the melody was changing, Yang-yi gently hummed in her ears along with the rhythm. "Face to face, sit on the merry-go-round, listen to the music, talk about wishes." That's right. Yang-yi had changed the lyrics of a very good song, "The Most Romantic Thing," to match the current situation. However, as he hummed gently and his soft breath entered her ears, Murphy couldn't help but feel her body go limp. An indescribable romantic feeling began to fill her heart. "You want me to be gentler and gentler, I want you to keep me in your heart." Listening to the lyrics that Yang-yi sang, Murphy suddenly had an inexplicable feeling. It was as if she had returned to the time when her relationship with Yang-yi began to ease. Wasn't that right? At that time, Yang-yi was very fierce. Murphy felt wronged every time she saw him. Naturally, she also treated him coldly. However, in her heart, Murphy also hoped that Yang-yi could be gentler. Fortunately, she didn't miss out. Yang-yi really became gentler and gentler, opening her frozen heart. Thinking about it this way, perhaps, the Yang-yi at that time was just like what he sang in the lyrics, hoping that she would keep him in her heart. "Sorry, hubby. I was always cold to you in the past." Murphy couldn't help but grab Yang-yi's hand that was wrapped around her lower abdomen. She said apologetically. However, Yang-yi paused. He pulled out his hand and pressed his index finger on Murphy's lips, not allowing her to apologize. He continued to sing softly, "The most romantic thing I can think of is to slowly grow old with you. Along the way, I'll collect bits and pieces of laughter. In the future, sitting in a rocking chair, we'll slowly chat." Murphy was touched by the lyrics. She sat on the merry-go-round and gently opened her arms, allowing herself to completely snuggle into Yang Yi's embrace. The sadness and emotions just now all flowed into crystal-clear tears. They all flowed into the happy smile at the corner of her mouth. As the merry-go-round spun, it was as if they were also waving in the night wind. When the waves of happiness receded from her mind, giving Murphy some space to think, Murphy heard Yang Yi singing the last part of the song. "The most romantic thing I can think of is to slowly grow old with you. Until we're too old to go anywhere, I'll still treat you as the treasure in my hand." She happily laid in Yang Yi's embrace for a while before mischievously turning her head. She giggled at the person she loved the most and said, No, I can't grow old so quickly. I still want to come here to play in the future. Next time, we have to do this secretly. Of course." Yang Yi smiled and reached out to scratch the bridge of her nose. The two hugged each other and happily sat on the merry-go-round for a while. However, after the happiness gradually passed, their thoughts returned to reality. "Hubby, do you think it's a little bad for us to leave the children in the hotel and come out alone?" Murphy asked a little worriedly. "It does seem a little bad." Yang Yi scratched his head. He also wanted to give Murphy a romantic expression. He didn't think too much about it. They looked at each other and smiled, then quickly jumped off the merry-go-round. Murphy held Yang Yi's hand and with a bell-like laughter, the two of them started to run outside like children. We can't stay here for too long. Quick, let's go back and see the children." End of book. Chapter 1298. Introduction 1. She is not yet 4 years old. She has just moved to the coffee shop near the school with her father. She hasn't told Murphy. This is a story between Chapter 21 and Chapter 23. In fact, before she came, Yang Yi had already cleaned up the accommodation in the coffee shop. He had also bought the necessities. It could be said that he was ready to move in. Therefore, after moving in with Shi today, Yang Yi only needed to tidy up the clothes he brought, some of the items he needed to collect, and some of Shi's necessities. While her father was folding the clothes, Shi didn't stay idle. The little girl first moved close to her father and watched him fold the clothes, but soon, she felt a little bored. How could her father keep folding clothes? The little girl went to the side of the big bed in the bedroom. She grabbed the mattress with her two small hands and then propped herself up with her small belly. Her two thin legs kicked in the air. Before Yang Yi could think of giving her a push, she twisted her waist and moved sideways onto the bed. She put her feet on the bed with difficulty and then turned over on the bed. The little girl's belly was facing up. She arched her head and neck and kicked her 2 feet. Like an earthworm, she moved to the front of her father. Because of this, the little girl's bangs that her father had combed were messed up. But it didn't matter. She opened her big eyes and looked at her father, who was upside down from her angle, and giggled. Yang Yi's originally closed lips couldn't help but curve up at the little girl's cute appearance. He smiled gently and reached out to rub Shi's forehead. "Papa." She called out clearly. Yang Yi responded. She just giggled and didn't say anything for a long time. Perhaps feeling that her father was paying attention to the stack of clothes again, she laughed for a while, turned over, and looked at her father, muttering, "Papa, what are you doing?" Although he knew that she was asking the obvious, Yang Yi still patiently said, "Daddy is folding clothes." She lay on the bed. After waiting for a while, she couldn't help but ask, "Papa is folding clothes? Why are you folding clothes?" Yang Yi continued to answer gently, "Because the clothes were wrinkled, Dad had to fold them again so that they wouldn't look bad in the wardrobe." She, who was not even 4 years old, had a lot of information to say. The little girl opened her mouth slightly and stared at her father's skillful movements. Of course, she didn't need to continue to stand on tiptoe to attract her father's attention. Yang Yi had already quickly finished packing the clothes. Shi, what do you want to eat for lunch? Yang Yi looked at the little girl who was rolling around on the bed and smiled. Today we moved to a bigger house and a bigger kitchen. What do you want to eat? Dad will make it for you. Perhaps because she felt her father's attention, Cici happily turned over and got up from the bed. She jumped on the soft bed, blinked her big eyes, and said to her father, "What do you want to eat?" "Yes, what do you want to eat? Tell Dad." Yang Yi stretched out his hand to tidy up Shi's messy hair. Although he didn't know how to tie hair, he still learned how to untie Shi's hairband and put it back on Yang Yi's hair. Shi turned around obediently, but she was a little impatient. She stood there, shaking her little butt as if she was dancing. With her back to her father, she giggled and said, "I want to eat French fries." French fries? Yang Yi was a little surprised. He didn't expect Shi to want to eat these. But thinking about it carefully, Yang Yi didn't have the answer to the hypothetical question, what would Shi want to eat? In his memory, he knew too little about his daughter. Shi's back was to her father. She seemed to be a little worried that her father didn't know, so she couldn't help but turn around and gesture with her little hands. Yes, French fries. This is so yummy. The little girl used her little fingers, which were about the size of French fries, to gesture and even made a gesture of dipping them in ketchup for her father. Although the little girl didn't have a lot of vocabulary and it was a little difficult to explain, Yang Yi couldn't help but laugh when he saw her pouting her red little lips and blinking her big bright eyes. He wanted to reach out and pinch the little girl's pink cheeks. "Okay, Dad will fry French fries for you." After tying up Cici's hair, Yang Yi slapped his palm downwards, holding the little girl's little butt and lifting her up high. Ha ha. She grabbed her father's shoulders with both hands, and her bell-like laughter resounded throughout the house. Although she said that she liked French fries weren't healthy food and didn't have enough nutrition. So Yang Yi rummaged through the ingredients in the fridge. In the end, other than French fries, he also fried a salmon tail, a large piece of steak, and a large plate of vegetable and fruit salad. This meal tasted a little like Western food, but to Yang Yi, his food didn't care whether it was Chinese or Western food. As long as it was delicious, it was delicious. When Yang Yi brought the last fried salmon tail to the dining table, he saw that she had already climbed onto the chair by herself. Her 2 knees pressed against her skirt as she knelt on the cushioned chair. She reached out to grab the still slightly hot French fries on the plate. After hearing the movement, she turned around and saw her father looking at her. The little girl hurriedly retracted her hands. She was very embarrassed as she wiped her 2 little hands on her body and laughed at her father. Hee. You have to wash your hands. Don't wipe your hands on your body. Yang Yi said gently. He put the 2 plates on the table and laughed. You didn't even wait for the ketchup before you started eating? Hee. The little girl's 2 little hands grabbed the edge of the table, and she even shrank her head. Only her head above her nose was exposed on the table. She looked at her father and continued to smile. Yang Yi waved at her. The little girl was indifferent. She was still peeking at her father and laughing. Go wash your hands. You can only eat after you wash your hands, Yang Yi had to say. Hee, Mom said the same thing. The little girl ran in front of her father, raised her head, and looked at her father with a smile of exultation. When it was time to eat, she couldn't sit still. When she was eating happily, she even stepped on the chair and ate the French fries in various positions. Looking at the way she twisted her body, it felt like the little girl was dancing for her father. Yang Yi felt that Shi's behavior was not very ladylike. However, he hadn't thoroughly studied the education books that he bought not long ago. He wasn't sure if he should correct Shi's behavior, so he chose to hold back for the time being. Not only did he hold back, but Yang Yi also stepped on Shi's chair with his right foot to prevent the little girl from losing her balance and falling back. Eat some fish, Yang Yi said softly. He picked up the communal chopsticks and picked up a piece of fried salmon from the thickest part of the fish tail. He said to Shi, the salmon that Dad made is delicious. But I'm eating French fries. She was still holding a French fry in her right hand. She leaned on her father's arm and gestured to him while trying to put the fry into her mouth. However, she quickly reacted and chuckled, I forgot about the ketchup. The little girl quickly turned around and pressed half of her body on the table. She dipped her head in the ketchup before putting it into her mouth. You can eat French fries, but you also have to eat some fish and vegetables, right? Because if you only eat French fries, the nutrition won't keep up. Those tall and big brothers and sisters need to eat a lot to grow up quickly. Yang Yi patiently reasoned with Shi. When you were in the car yesterday, didn't you tell Dad that you wanted to grow up quickly and then sit in the front? I want to sit in the front. She nodded seriously and said to her father. Then you have to eat fish and vegetables. Yang Yi smiled and said, Okay. She was obedient this time. She hugged her father's hand and sat down on the chair so that she could eat the fish that her father fed her. The little girl's little mouth was eating happily. Soon, her eyes lit up and she looked at her father in surprise. Is it delicious? Yang Yi looked at her and couldn't help but feel happy. The corner of his mouth curled up and he asked with a smile that he didn't notice. Cece's two little hands waved up and down, as if expressing the endless joy in her heart. She raised her little head, and her eyes curved into crescents as she said to her father, He, super delicious. Unfortunately, the little girl didn't know how to describe her feelings. She couldn't describe the crispy skin and tender meat. But what did it matter? The little girl had already used her body language and her happy expression to give her father a big thumbs up. Then eat more. Also eat some vegetables. Yang Yi picked up food for the little girl. When her mouth was full, he took the opportunity to cut his steak and put a piece into his mouth to chew. Well, it's a bit too cooked. But this beef still needs to be cooked well. The food market is not assured. Yang Yi evaluated himself and inadvertently turned his head. He saw a pair of bright eyes staring at him. Those pure eyes had an indescribable penetrating power that directly penetrated Yang Yi's heart. Oh! Yang Yi's forehead was covered with a drop of cold sweat. He inexplicably felt a little ashamed and said, Shi, do you want to eat more fish? The little girl also came back to her senses and sweetly called out, Papa. She excitedly held her father's hand and stepped on her father's thigh from the chair. Her small body leaned back and nestled in her father's wide arms. Her small hand pointed at the large piece of beef on her father's plate and said softly, Papa, she also wants to eat. Yes, how could he eat alone? She felt that her father was eating very happily. Yang Yi carried Shi back to her chair and said, Okay, but you have to wait. Papa will cut a smaller piece for you. You can't eat such a big piece. It's better to cut it smaller. She curiously looked at her father's movements. Although she didn't understand clearly, she still believed in her father and didn't argue. Yang Yi cut a piece of beef for her and gave it to her with chopsticks. The little girl sat on the side and chewed with relish. You have to chew it thoroughly before you can eat it. Yang Yi worriedly warned. She was very happy to eat with her father, but unfortunately, Cece was still too small and couldn't eat too much. She quickly ate until her little belly was bulging. Then, she sat on the chair and giggled as she looked at her father, who was still eating in big mouthfuls of meat. I'm full. The little girl looked for a while and saw that her father wasn't looking at her. She touched her small belly and said to her father with a smile. Yang Yi turned his head and smiled at her. Papa, look at me. The little girl looked at her small belly and motioned for her father to touch her bulging belly. Not bad, you are indeed full. Later, Papa will take you to the school for a walk. The school is also very beautiful. Yang Yi said softly. Okay. She happily waved her two small hands and then pressed them in front of her body. She looked up at her father and smiled sweetly. She was very happy to be with Papa. She could always play with Papa and eat delicious food with Papa. Papa is very delicious. She thought happily in her heart. She didn't feel that there was anything wrong with her words. Anyway, she just thought in her heart and no one heard it. I have to tell Mom tonight. Chapter 1299. Today, because they had to move from the village in the city of Wuhu district, they had lunch a little late. When Yang Yi finished cleaning up the dishes, it was almost time for lunch. However, she was in high spirits. She was thinking about what her father had said about going to school. When her father was cleaning up the dishes, she ran around the house and had no intention of sleeping at all. The sliding door of the kitchen was gently opened with a crash. A cute little head came in, blinked her big eyes, and asked sweetly, "Papa, are we going shopping?" "Yes, but we're not going shopping, we're going to visit the school." Yang Yi laughed. He wiped his hands and spread the cloth flat. "Are you going to visit the school?" Cici muttered as she followed her father out. "Yes, we live next to the school. Let's go, put on your shoes. We will go for a walk to digest our food. We will come back for a nap later." Yang Yi gently patted the little girl's head and said softly. She ran to the front actively and said happily, "I can put on my shoes by myself. I don't need Papa to put them on for me." Yang Yi looked at the little girl sitting on the stool in front of the stairs and trying to put on her shoes. She was quite smart. Her every move revealed dexterity. She put on her beautiful little sandals correctly on her left and right feet and pressed the Velcro with her little hands. Papa, look. After the little girl put on her shoes, she jumped on the floor. Then, as if she was asking for praise, she stretched out her feet for her father to see. She looked up at her father with her big eyes full of expectation. Yang Yi understood she's expectation. He praised her a little clumsily. "Not bad, not bad. You are wearing beautiful clothes." But what did it matter? Even if there were no fancy words, she was satisfied to hear her father's praise. She turned around, shook her head, and smiled happily. Jiangqing Media University was located at the foot of Tingshan Mountain and was next to the Grand Canal. Naturally, the scenery of the campus was impeccable. Yang Yi led she along the school path. The trees on both sides of the path were verdant and tall. The tall and sturdy tree trunks seemed to reach into the clouds. The green area of the campus was very wide. Not to mention the lush and dense leaves, not to mention the verdant grass, even the outer walls of the buildings were covered with many vine leaves that would sway in the breeze. It was as if the whole campus was shrouded in a wonderful sea of trees. Occasionally, dark green waves would bring a cool breeze to this hot afternoon. Of course, no matter how beautiful the campus scenery was, it couldn't be compared to the beautiful little scenery in front of Yang Yi. 1, 2, 3, 4. The little girl counted the number of steps in her soft and cute voice as she walked unsteadily on the road. Perhaps it was because she was happy to be out with her father, but she was more mischievous than usual. Instead of walking on the spacious and flat school path, she had to walk on this challenging road for her father to see. If it was another parent, or if it was the stricter Mo Fei, Cici might have been scolded and then walked down the stairs unhappily. After all, the road was too narrow, and a child's sense of balance was relatively average. If she wasn't careful, she might fall and even knock her teeth out. However, Yang Yi didn't stop her. He didn't think that this little risk was anything to do with it. After all, in his previous life, when he was Shishi's age, he was already struggling in the dangerous jungle. Therefore, even though he knew that Shishi might fall, he was still willing to let Shishi play because he would be carefully protecting her from behind. Yang Yi reached out his hand, ready to pull the little girl up at any time. However, to his relief, although Shishi was unsteady, she didn't fall and barely managed to maintain her balance. However, the little girl started to get nervous towards the end, and her counting started to mess up. 12, 13, 17, 10, 10. Yang Yi saw that the little girl was stuttering as she walked forward. He couldn't help but smile and say, 12, 13, the next one is 14. Why is it 17? She followed her father's words and continued to count, 15, 17. She skipped another number, and Yang Yi suddenly felt a little unnatural. He simply led Shi in counting, 15, 16, 17. With her father's voice, Shi read more energetically. The little girl walked in front, and her steps and tone were very strong. She even wanted to show off in front of her father, and tried hard to say the numbers before her father opened his mouth. After playing like this for a while, she jumped down from the curb by herself. The little girl turned around and looked at her father with her big watery eyes. Soon, the little girl's smile became wider, and the corners of her eyes curved slightly like crescent moons. She giggled and said, "Papa, you too, you should do the same thing as me." She excitedly took her father's hand and gestured, wanting her father to walk on the curb with her, instead of walking on the side of the road. Yang-yi wouldn't refuse. He smiled and walked steadily on the curb. "Papa, you have to follow me." She saw that her father could walk very well without her teaching him. She smiled with satisfaction, turned her head, and gently swung her little ponytail. She ran in front of her father, stood on the curb, and strode forward. "Slow down, don't rush." Yang-yi was worried that she would miss a step, so he hurriedly advised her in a soft voice. She misunderstood. She was very kind and said in a soft voice, "Okay then. I'll wait for Papa." Although it was already lunchtime and Jiangchuan's campus was a lot quieter, there were still some students walking around the campus. Yang-yi took Shi for a walk on the campus. The little girl laughed happily, and her sweet laughter attracted a lot of people's attention. Yang-yi took Shi to a flower bed. The little girl's cute and delicate face, pink and pretty little skirt, and the blooming flowers were shining brightly. Yang-yi keenly noticed that behind them, a girl wearing black bloomers, a white short t-shirt, and a small round hat like an artist, secretly picked up the SLR camera she had been holding. This girl originally came to take pictures of the scenery, but now she probably felt that she and the flowers in the flower bed formed a very beautiful composition, so she picked up the camera and wanted to take a picture. Yang-yi noticed before she took action. Now he frowned slightly and hesitated. She wants to secretly take a picture of Shi? Although he knew that the girl probably didn't have any bad intentions, Yang-yi didn't want someone to take a picture of him. In his previous life, if he was photographed, it meant that trouble would come knocking on his door very quickly. However, when Yang-yi turned slightly and was about to stop her, he hesitated again. "You are no longer an assassin who is tired of running for his life. You are now an ordinary person who needs to integrate into society." Yang-yi silently warned himself in his heart. Would an ordinary person care about other people's camera? Yang-yi thought about it from the perspective of an ordinary person. Maybe I would care, but I wouldn't show it too much. After all, it's just a picture, not a gun to my forehead. As Yang-yi hesitated, the girl snapped a picture of Shi. Should I go up and ask her to delete the picture? Yang-yi frowned. However, Yang-yi still hoped that he could integrate into the world of ordinary people and live a peaceful life like an ordinary person. Let's not react so violently. She is just a student. Taking a picture won't affect us much. Yang-yi secretly weighed the pros and cons. He felt that if he went to negotiate with others, it wouldn't affect his image. Moreover, he might leave an impression on Shi that he was a fierce father. Yang-yi didn't make a move, but at this time, Shi noticed the girl's action. After all, there were only the three of them in the vicinity of the flower bed. When the girl saw that the girl was pointing a camera at her, she was a little embarrassed. Perhaps it wasn't because of the camera, but she was still very afraid of socializing. She was used to being alone. She ran back to her father's side and hugged her father's leg with her two little hands. She hid her head behind her father's but only peeked out a little to sneak a peek at the young lady with one eye. "What's the matter?" Yang-yi patted the girl's head and asked softly. She found a sense of security by her father's side. The girl raised her small head and explained to her father in a low voice, There, someone is looking at me." Yang-yi turned his head and saw that the girl who was secretly taking pictures saw that she was discovered. She bowed to Yang-yi embarrassedly, blushed, and ran away shyly. Yang-yi smiled and explained to Shi, "It's okay. That girl saw that you were so pretty, so she took a picture of you." This was also the explanation that he found for himself. He. When the girl saw that the outsider had left, she secretly breathed a sigh of relief. She looked at her father and didn't say anything. She just stood there and smiled. She was really a shy little girl. Chapter 1300. Mo Fei was actually very relieved to send Cece to Yang Yi's place. After all, Yang Yi's love for his daughter was indescribable. After the little girl came back from her father's house last time, she even said a lot of good things about her father to Mo Fei. Murphy finished a day's work and dragged her tired body back at night. She lay on the sofa in a daze, wondering if she should call Yang Yi to check on Shi's situation. On one hand, she missed her daughter and wanted to know if the little girl was having fun. On the other hand, Murphy didn't want to talk to Yang Yi. That bastard. Murphy couldn't help but grit her teeth when she thought of how Yang Yi had talked back to her yesterday. It wasn't entirely Yang Yi's fault. Murphy later reflected on herself. She had given Yang Yi money without thinking, and it was easy for Yang Yi to feel disgusted. Murphy knew that Yang Yi had a strong sense of self-esteem. Otherwise, he wouldn't have kept rejecting her financial aid and stay in that dirty and smelly rental house. Thinking of this, Murphy thought of the scene she saw yesterday. For example, Yang Yi's house was clean and tidy, and Yang Yi's house smelled good as if it had been sprayed with air freshener. And Yang Yi's bulging muscles after taking a shower. Murphy's face suddenly turned red when she thought of this. She spat and shook her head hurriedly, throwing the charming scene to the back of her mind. But you shouldn't be so reckless. Can't you give in to a woman a little? I'm giving you money in hopes that you can live a better life. It's not like... Murphy knew that her way of doing things was a little inappropriate, and her words were stiff, but she couldn't help but complain in her heart. After thinking for a long time, Murphy decided to let go of the resentment in her heart. She took out her phone and called Yang Yi. Beep, beep. While waiting, Murphy suddenly felt a little flustered, and her heart pounded. However, the wait was a little long, so long that Murphy wondered if she had dialed the wrong number. She put away her panic and looked at the phone in front of her to see the number. That's right. Why isn't he picking up the phone? Murphy thought that she couldn't get through, but at the last few rings, she suddenly saw the phone screen flash. It was connected. Murphy hurriedly picked up the phone. Her heart was flustered, and she didn't know what to say. However, she heard Shi's voice. Hello, I'm Shi. Are you Mom? Is it Shi? Murphy breathed a sigh of relief, and her heart calmed down a little. She cleared her throat and said, Ahem, Shi, it's Mom. The little girl's giggles immediately came from the phone. Shi happily called Mom, and then she couldn't wait to say, Mom, let me tell you Papa's phone rang, and I was shocked. Then I saw that it was Mom's phone. It was not strange that she could recognize it. Last time, she used her father's phone to call her mother. Listening to the little girl's dependence, Murphy's mood improved a lot. The physical and mental tiredness brought by the work she had to do since the early morning seemed to be driven away by Shi's laughter. Are you having fun at Papa's house? Murphy asked softly. Yes. Shi's laughter came over. She had already answered her mother's question clearly, but she still wanted to talk to her mother. Today, Papa and I moved. Mom, don't you think it's super cool? Murphy's eyes widened in surprise, and she quickly asked, Moved? Why did you move? Where did you move to? Because Papa said we were moving. She still couldn't understand her mother's many questions. She tilted her little head in confusion and said according to her own thoughts, Mom, let me tell you, Papa and I are living in a big house. It's bigger than Mom's house, super big. And I like it very much. When she was describing, Murphy's mind was in a mess, and she fell into a terrible association. Where did Yang Yi take Shi? He won't take Shi away and not return Shi to me, right? Why didn't he tell me that he was moving? Why didn't he call me all day? Although Murphy didn't want to believe that Yang Yi was such a person, Murphy faintly felt that the Yang Yi she met these 2 times seemed to have changed a little. However, Murphy's mind was in a mess at the moment, and she seemed to have forgotten that Yang Yi was not the kind of person who would take the initiative to report to her. Yang Yi had never taken the initiative to call Murphy, and now Yang Yi had no intention of telling Murphy about his own affairs. How could he communicate with Murphy about moving? "Mom, Papa has a super big bed here. I want to sleep with Papa and Mom." She was tired of standing and talking on the phone, so she simply took the phone that she had tiptoed to the table and climbed onto the soft big bed. She put the phone on the bed, threw herself on the quilt, and giggled to her mother. Murphy was a little absent-minded. She was still thinking about how to ask Shi and get the address of Yang Yi's new residence from Shi. But at this time, Yang Yi, who had finished bathing for Shi, came back. He heard the movement in the bedroom, so he walked over and looked at Shi. "Shi, who are you talking to on the phone?" "Papa." Shi saw her father and screamed happily. The little girl felt that her mother and father were there, so she was so excited that she could no longer sit still. She climbed up and jumped on the bed with her white and tender little feet. She pointed at the phone that was still on the bed and was tossing and turning because of her jumping. She said enthusiastically, "Papa, I'm talking to Mom on the phone." When Yang Yi heard that she was talking to Murphy on the phone, he hesitated for a moment. He felt that he shouldn't pretend to be cold, so he walked over and picked up the phone. Under Shi's expectant gaze, he started talking to Murphy. "Well, it's me." Yang Yi's voice was very low. "I moved to the school, Jiang City Media University. Because I rented a shop, I can open a coffee shop downstairs." Perhaps because she was looking at him, Yang Yi actually calmed down and calmly explained to Murphy, who was questioning him. On the other side of the phone, Murphy was originally full of anger. But when she heard Yang Yi's calm explanation, and his tone wasn't hard and uncomfortable, Murphy was stunned. When she wanted to get angry again, she found that her anger had disappeared without her knowing. When she talked to Yang Yi, her voice was still very cold, but her tone was much gentler. "Then, tell me the address, and I'll go over to take a look tomorrow." "Why didn't you tell me?" Murphy unconsciously said the last sentence in a slightly reproachful tone. Of course, it wasn't very obvious, and Murphy herself didn't notice it. "Okay, I'll write it to you in a text message after I hang up," Yang Yi replied straightforwardly. Murphy's hanging heart finally relaxed by half. But Shi, who was next to her, didn't let it go. She jumped on the bed, her two little hands still holding onto her father's big hands. She shouted anxiously, No, don't hang up. I still want to talk to Mom." The little girl's soft and cute voice still diluted a lot of the barrier between Yang Yi and Murphy. Yang Yi said a few words to Murphy, then passed the phone to Shi. She still had a lot to say to her mother because she went to the school to play today. There were a lot of new things that she wanted to share with her mother. The next day, Murphy finished her work early. According to the address given by Yang Yi, she asked the driver to send her to the north gate of Jiang City Media University. Before she left, Murphy didn't hold back. She called Yang Yi early. So, before she got out of the car, she saw Yang Yi standing by the roadside waiting for her. Shorts, t-shirt, and flip-flops, Yang Yi was wearing sneakers. This guy was dressed so casually. The taxi driver didn't recognize Murphy, but he glanced at the beautiful and arrogant Murphy, who was wearing a dark blue, sparkling, and knee-length slim-fit dress with light-colored sunglasses. Then, he looked at Yang Yi with an expression of disbelief. It was as if a fresh flower was stuck in cow dung. Ignoring the taxi driver, Murphy was actually a little unhappy when she saw Yang Yi's nonchalant look. But she didn't care too much. After she walked to Yang Yi's side, Murphy snorted softly. "Let's go," Yang Yi said calmly to Murphy with a wooden face. She was still waiting at home. Yang Yi was still worried. Of course, before they went upstairs, Yang Yi still gave a simple introduction to Murphy. "The coffee shop is downstairs. It hasn't been renovated yet. Upstairs is the living quarters." Murphy pursed her lips. Seeing that Yang Yi had changed his living quarters, although she didn't see what it was like inside, she was still a little happy. After all, the place where Yang Yi used to live was too messy and narrow. But Murphy's happy mood turned into a few muffled mumbles. "It's too secluded." What kind of place did he choose? The atmosphere between the two was a little awkward. Luckily, when they went upstairs, Shishi's happy laughter swept away the awkwardness. The little girl happily jumped into her mother's arms. "Mama, did you miss me?" They hadn't seen each other for 2 days, and she was doted on by her father in every possible way. She sweetly acted coquettishly in her mother's arms. Murphy actually wanted to tease her daughter, but now that Yang Yi was looking at her from behind, she was a little embarrassed. She also wanted to maintain the image of a strong woman in front of Yang Yi, so she coughed twice and let Shishi stand back on the ground. Okay. I missed you, but you have to be good." "I'm very good." She tilted her little head and looked at her mother's expression. Then, she giggled. She couldn't wait to take her mother to see her father's big house. Because she had introduced it to her mother yesterday, her father's big house was much bigger than her mother's. After going through a few rooms, the little girl ran back to the master bedroom. She passed by the bed and grabbed the railing of the balcony with her 2 little hands. She called out in a crisp voice, "Mama, Kiki, come quickly. Here, there are so many flowers." When Murphy passed by the big bed in the master bedroom and was about to go to the balcony to look at the scenery outside the small building with Shishi, her eyes couldn't help but linger on the big bed that could be said to be a little wide. "Papa has a super big bed here. I want to sleep with Papa and Mom." Shishi's soft voice on the phone yesterday seemed to echo in Murphy's ears again. Sleep together. Thinking of this, Murphy's white face suddenly turned red. Bad intentions. Murphy shyly scolded Yang Yi in her heart. She didn't know that in the future, this big bed not only didn't become the main battlefield of bad intentions, but because this big bed was occupied by Shishi, the whole family left this room. She and Yang Yi were... Ahem, of course, this was a story for another day. Achoo! In the living room, Yang Yi, who was putting Murphy's shoes on the shoe rack and hanging up Murphy's small suit, suddenly sneezed. Yang Yi raised his head, a little confused. You're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.